So I think that this episode should get a preamble. I am not stating, because this may anger some people listening, may upset some people listening. I'm not saying you don't have the ability and you shouldn't have the right to shoot long range and pursue that. I certainly agree with shall not be infringed in any way. You certainly should have the right to do it. My case put forth here today that I hope you'll listen to with an open mind is on the practicality. Is it practical for long-range shooting? Because patrons got access to this first, and I got quite a bit of pushback on this episode. And I guess somewhat fairly, one of the patrons asked me, well, define practical. And I think that was a fair question. I answered him in a tactical aspect, but I can also address it to you guys for a hunting aspect. Can you see and identify the target as a threat? And is it a threat to you? And is engaging that threat the most logical and moral course of action? And as far as hunting goes, outside of a survival scenario like you're starving to death, right? That kind of survival scenario. Not like I'm going out to live off the land, which is something I love to do. Can you reasonably expect, with your conditions that you're in, your talent, skill, and ability, including your weapon, have a reasonable expectation of harvesting that animal with the shot you're about to take? I guess the bulk of this will be addressed in the episode. I'm going to plug in the bio, and then we'll get into the main topic. So, who am I? Who is this person talking to you from across the internet? Why should you listen? First and foremost, I am a Christian, a servant of God, and a follower of Jesus Christ. God has blessed me to do many things in my life, for I could do nothing apart from Him. U.S. Marine Corps combat veteran, did a couple of tours in Iraq. As an assaultman after my combat tours, I was an urban warfare instructor for the Marine Corps under Mojave Viper. Also served in the U.S. Army, both full-time and part-time National Guard. Also did several years in law enforcement, LAPD. I worked regular assignments and more specialized assignments. Been a private contractor for a 3-letter government agency. That's all I'll say about that. Been blessed to be a state rifle and pistol champion and West Coast Regional Rifle Champion. Won more shooting competitions with the talent that God's given me than I can actually remember. Was blessed to be the commander of a tactical team in a large metropolitan area. Our primary job, the reason we primarily existed, was to stop active shooters. I got the opportunity to head up and be the commander of that team. I grew up around guns, hunting and shooting and competing at a very early age. Been blessed to hunt all over this beautiful country, from whitetail on the East Coast to mule deer on the West Coast, and bear and elk and all manner of things. I've even been a professional big game hunter and guide. But again, most importantly, I'm a Christian. And I am your host, Michael Milito. Welcome to the podcast. Long-range precision shooting. Can we still be friends? And anybody that's, an American that has dated since the turn of the century probably knows what that really means, right? That really means that's a kind of common vernacular for I'm not really in love with you, right? That's what that means in a more polite, generous manner. On a quick aside, much like I think gun culture is wrong on this, I think mainstream culture is wrong on this. They try and paint dating as this glorious thing where you get to meet all these women and whatever. And for somebody that's dated more women than I can honestly remember, or I should say that I care to remember, being blessed by God with a wonderful wife whom you love and who loves you. You don't have to worry, by God's grace, about who she's texting or where she's going to be tonight or whatever, and you have somebody that you care about and can protect and provide for as a man. That's so much better than running around and this whole dating culture. Not dating to find the one, courting to be married, but this just dating for the sake of dating. It's just so much better. speaking from real-world first-hand experience. Now let's get into real-world first-hand experience on this topic. If you liken shooting disciplines to women, one of the first women that I really seriously dated was precision rifle. I cut my teeth in that. I have won, I don't know how many, threw my trophies away a while ago, but I have a picture of like a Tupperware container that was full of trophies, and my first earliest ones were precision rifle stuff, and not PRS. I don't know when PRS came about, but talking the turn of the century, like, I don't know if PRS was a thing. I had certainly never heard of it then. From very quick research, meaning Wikipedia, I see on here that in 2012, PRS had only 164 competitors. And this, we're talking way before 2012. We're talking literally turn of the century and back in the last century. I started competition shooting at a very early age. I was blessed to win gold medals, state championships. Then looked at some of those old pictures of trophies, and I guess whatever you would call multiple or a multi-state championship that I kind of just, I guess, forgot about. Anyway, I joined the Marine Corps at 17, which, as you might imagine, put quite the halt on my competition shooting because there was a war on. I joined pre 9/11, but by the time I was done with boot camp, we were at war. And I was in Iraq waiting for us to actually kick off and cross the border into Iraq. That said, in my time in the Marine Corps, Marines are kind of known for being good riflemen. When I was an expert among good riflemen, I was an expert in the Marine Corps. And we're talking, this was before ACOGs and all that. I was issued an old rattly salt dog of a rifle, an old M16A2. It literally rattled and was maybe as much silver as it was black anymore on the metal, the steel and aluminum parts. She was an old salt dog and was able to hit man-sized targets at 500 meters with iron sights with no artificial support on that. Just a good prone position and a sling. And I got out of the Marine Corps and I went to work for LAPD, and as you might imagine, early on in my law enforcement career, I was kind of developed in this, making it through the academy and getting off of probation as a boot in LAPD. And a little bit later on in my career, in my law enforcement career, I thought, I want to get back in to shooting a little bit more than just what I'm doing at my job. I got in what was natural, I would call precision rifle. Getting back into hunting, I thought I can take this really good precision rifle stuff and apply it to hunting. And keep in mind, this is way before this new swing. This was back when it was the new hot thing, but I had a background in it, so I thought, why don't I apply this to my law enforcement, to my life, to hunting, which is something I love that I was looking forward to getting back into. Yes, you can hunt in California, believe it or not. It actually has some quite good hunting in places. And I want to be clear, I was never a sniper in the Marine Corps. Going back to my time in the Marine Corps, I don't know about very first, but back before everybody was issued an ACOG, they took some select people and issued them an ACOG. I was an expert shooter. I got an ACOG. Also, I was the commander of a tactical team to stop active shooters. And everything that I have is a gift from God. I've been very blessed to be a very good shooter. And I was the commander of that team, but sometimes I would fill the role of a designated marksman because I was a good shooter. A good shooter among good shooters. I was very blessed, and I have been very blessed with that talent, and I try to use it and develop it. Sometimes I would both be the commander and a designated marksman for a mission. I wrote mission orders. I wrote operation orders. I would sometimes myself in those roles. But I don't want to pretend like I ever was a U.S. Marine Corps scout sniper, nor when I served in the Army was I a sniper. I was not. I want to be very clear about that. No stolen valor here. Moving on. So that's like talking about one of my very serious dating relationships in the overall shooting world. I guess you would say my very first serious thing that I competed in and did all these things in. And again, when I started getting back into it, I also thought, I was a Marine, I carried an M9. Right now I'm law enforcement and I carry a handgun. I should probably go look at doing a handgun competition. I thought, I'm a pretty good shooter as far as LAPD standards and police standards go. I'm probably going to do pretty good. I went to my first, I think it was USPSA, it may have been IDPA, competition years and years ago, and I got schooled. I got basically clowned. I thought that I was a decent handgun shooter, and I guess by police standards I was. I've said this many times. Police officers are not gunfighters. Police officers are administrative people, they're clerks, they're the vast majority, although they carry a gun, the vast majority of their job has nothing to do with guns or shooting. They might shoot some of the better departments once a month, once every 2 months. Liken it to, I work out. I'm also into fitness. I'm very blessed to be fit. How fit do you think I'd be if I worked out once every 2 months? Right? Or how good a runner do you think I would be if I ran once every 2 months? It's a perishable skill, much like that is. Anyway, I got schooled in handgun shooting. Even though I was a fantastic long-range precision rifle shooter, I was good at that. I had won trophy gold medal in that. And here I was getting schooled in a local practical shooting match. And there's two kinds of men, I guess, that would do that, really. I guess there's many different kinds of men, but two big ones that you see. People that go to the first competition and get just trampled on, and they just leave and don't come back. Or the ones that say, wow, I should probably get better, and they keep going. And in time, I started winning competitions and doing that kind of stuff in more practical shooting. USPSA, IDPA, Steel Challenge, things like that. Anyway, this was a turning point where I started to, I guess, see this precision rifle lady, warts and all. I came to maybe reflect on, or maybe I'm reflecting on it now to be fair, some truths that maybe I didn't even articulate at the time. One, you can be a very, very good, disciplined, precision, long-range rifleman. And I want to be clear, it is a discipline. It is a very hard thing. You talk about getting to the top of these disciplines, a match may be won or lost in millimeters. And there's something good about, and something great about trying to ring in all that accuracy and challenging yourself and challenging your equipment. And there's a great thing about, call it more precise rifle shooting, whatever discipline, because again, this predates PRS or ELR, I think, or any of those things. But that discipline has been around a long time, right? Since the old Creedmoor matches in New York, which I obviously wasn't at, but I get the discipline, I get the appeal there, I get the love of that. But here's a truth that I've come to see in my vast experience, not just with myself, but with other shooters. You can be really good at that kind of shooting and be a horrible, horrible handgun shooter. But somebody that's a really good handgun shooter, like an expert handgun shooter, will be a good rifle shooter. They might not be as familiar with all the technical and mathematics and knobs and turning, but their fundamentals of marksmanship will be on point if they're a really good or great or master handgun shooter. Because you can get away with a lot more in rifle shooting, just to be honest. If your trigger control is not great on a pistol, there's not much there to hide that. The weight of a big heavy rifle, a shooting jacket, a shooting glove being strapped into a pretty tight sling, all those things, you strip those away. And you're a lot more exposed. And your flaws as a shooter come out a lot more in a handgun. So if you can be a great handgun shooter, you'll often be good at many other disciplines of shooting. That crossover is much, much greater. I've never seen somebody that was a great, phenomenal handgun shooter that I gave them a rifle and they were just horrible with it. But I've seen, first of all, with myself, you can be really, really good with a precision long-range rifle or anything like that and be really bad with a handgun. And I looked at that. One of the reasons I went to a pistol match in the first place as a cop was I thought if I was going to get in a gun use of force, whatever it is, a shooting, whatever you want to call it, it was probably going to be with my handgun because that's what I had on me most of the time. So isn't that what I should be focusing on? That's most likely what I'm going to need to be good with. That's most likely the grace of God, and then the skill with that is going to come in the most handy for actual practical real-world purposes. Also, I reflected on my time in the Marine Corps. Again, I was an expert rifleman. I shot out to 500 yards. I also did 2 combat tours in Iraq. After that, I was an urban warfare instructor for the Marine Corps. You know what I never did or taught to try and keep those people alive that I was training to go to the sandbox in Mojave Viper? I never had them sit down and snap in with a sling with their range dope in a notebook and make wind calls and hit man-sized targets at 500 yards. It's very unpractical. I'm glad that the Marine Corps does it. I'm glad that the Marine Corps prides itself, and we as a nation kind of pride ourselves in being good riflemen. I really do. But that is really not how warfare shakes out. Gunfights, modern gunfights, and by modern I mean they learned this in World War I, back when a lot of the rifles coming out were regulated out to 1,000 yards. This is nothing new. That it's often much more dynamic and up close and personal. Even if you get a longer engagement over in the sandbox, the war on terror, whatever it is, with a semi-automatic, you're likely not dropping down, getting proper sling tension, licking your finger, putting it up in the air, making a good wind call. You're likely using a high rate of fire to walk rounds into that target, to that threat. You're probably not even taking time to dial up any dope on your sights or optical device or whatever it is. It's a very different, more dynamic thing than this discipline of shooting. Should you have that skill? Yes. But when I'm talking about practically war fighting, teaching men to war, that's not where we put the bulk of our training, because it's not super relevant. Even in the Marine Corps, as an infantryman, I was an assaultman. Except for rifle qualification, that's not how we did a lot of our training. Fully because we realized that that wasn't a very likely scenario to drop down to the prone and take our sling and configure it around our bicep and tricep and a little note on our sling to make sure the tension is proper, and then dial in the correct dope on our iron sights. And then 5 minutes later make one shot at 500 yards. Not that it could never happen. I never saw it happen, and I'm not aware of it ever happening. It could happen, to be fair. Just not in the Marine Corps even. That's not where you spend the bulk of your training. Let's go into the hunting arena. That's kind of the hot thing that the industry is telling you. You want to shoot elk, especially if you're from the East Coast and you don't really know, you may be getting bamboozled. You want to kill elk, you got to be able to make hits at 1,000 yards. I was talking about really open country, what you think of as the epitome of open country. I wanted to get back into hunting. I started, and this was when I was still doing the long range kind of precision rifle stuff, trying to get back into that when I wanted to get back into that, to shooting really outside of my law enforcement. And I was going on a pronghorn hunt, and I was all ready for the long range, had one of the probably now really crude and early range finders. I'm talking this would have been like 2006, 2009, 10, 12, so somewhere in there. I don't even remember. Old, I didn't have really a picture phone. I don't even have pictures of it. I went on a pronghorn hunt in this super open country, like what you would think of the epitome of open country. I don't know if you could see a tree. Maybe there was the occasional lonely juniper. Very much an out west landscape, grasslands. I went pronghorn hunting. I shot my pronghorn at 150 yards. Another person that was back, he said, I wanted to take out. We went out, and I think they saw theirs at between 40 and 60 yards. And that kind of was an eye-opener there, too. After that, sometime way after that, I took my biggest bear out west, well inside 100 yards. And I later decided I didn't want to stay LAPD. I didn't want to stay in California for freedom reasons. Northern California especially is some of the most beautiful country I've seen. But I honestly, this is about the time I became a Christian as well. I didn't think God was calling me to stay as a police officer, to stay where I was. So I quit. I left, packed it up, and moved to Idaho. I had been on a short visit to Idaho, and I really liked it. Didn't really know what I was doing, but I packed stuff up in my car and left. Did a lot of hunting in Idaho. Very blessed to do a ton of hunting in Idaho. And if you're in the bio, I've been a professional big game hunter and guide. I'll be honest, there have been a time or two, maybe literally a time or two, where I could have gotten a decent elk at a longer range, out, and I mean out past 300 yards. But the vastly more common situation is that myself or people that I would guide, they would miss really good opportunities on really good animals because they couldn't get a shot off quickly enough because they were too fiddly with these big scopes and high powers and heavy rifles. When honestly, they would have been better served with a pair of khakis, a pair of tennis shoes painted brown, a flannel shirt, and maybe their grandpa's 30-30 Marlin 336 that they could quick handle and and get out and get on foot and cover some ground and have some woodsmanship. So, is there anything wrong with long-range shooting? No, I love long-range shooting. I'm just not in love with long-range shooting, right? That other cliche that women might say, I love you, I'm just not in love with you. But anyway, so I do love long-range shooting, but there's the kind of that principle, the 80-20, if you've heard of that. Now, even all the roles I've had: a professional gunfighter, urban warfare instructor, private contractor, an instructor for private contractors, where I had, thanks to us taxpayers, just literal bunkers of ammo. That was my full-time job. Even then, there's a limited amount of time and money that we can dedicate to shooting. Would you concede that is true? Even if it's your full-time job, even as a professional gunfighter, there's a limit to how much time you can spend gunfighting, practicing gunfighting, training for gunfighting. Are you going to spend that training on something that's a very niche application, has not as much crossover with other important shooting disciplines? Or are you going to spend the bulk of your time in training, that it be defensive or hunting, for what's going to give you the most results? When I was a child, I thought like a child, I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I put away childish ways. Looking at it from a military perspective, snipers are absolutely a crucial thing and an important thing for militaries, Army, Marine Corps, foreign armies, right? And they're proven themselves for a long time in history now, since the American Revolution, probably even before that, as being effective. But what percentage, even of grunts, U.S. Marine Corps infantrymen, U.S. Army infantry, the combat arms, even if you want to make it even bigger, what percentage of those people are snipers? Very, very, very tiny percentage. Likewise, when I was commander of a tactical team to stop active shooters, a designated marksman is an important role. I might have 30-something guys. I might have 1 or 2 designated marksmen. You get what I'm saying? It's a very tiny percentage. Everybody wants to be that one guy. And I get that, but that's a very niche thing. And nothing against Marine Corps Scout snipers. I applaud them for what they do. They were attached to us when I was over, warring, whatever you want to call it. They very often went unused. Vast majority of casualties are caused by other things, and if it's infantry casualties, often caused by kicking down doors and CQB and urban warfare type stuff. And not that sniping is not a part of that, it's just a very small part. If you step back and judge soberly, and not on fantasy, you could paint all these scenarios in your head of, if this happens, or it's the end of the world, or whatever, then I'm going to be a sniper, but a very tiny niche application. Is that where you're spending the bulk of your time? And if you want to, that's fine. If you consider shooting for you like golf, like it's not really a practical thing that's really going to help you in real life in any way, it's just your way to relax. If you like to go out and ring steel at 1,000 meters, that's fine. But it's much more likely you're going to get jacked at a 7-Eleven because you forgot to fill your car up with gas, have to go somewhere late at night. You're ever going to have to, in any kind of defense situation, especially as a civilian or law enforcement, engage a target at 1,000 meters. Talking about a cop, it's much more likely you're going to go into a domestic violence situation and somebody's going to grab a gun when you're inside a house, or a knife or something like that. That stuff happens all the time. Law enforcement engaging targets at past 500 meters is, I'm not going to say it never happens, but I'm not aware of any, and the exception probably proves the rule there. Also talking about hunting, I'm not telling you what you should do for ethics, because if, I'll be honest, consider myself a survivalist and a prepper, and I'll often go out in the wilderness. If I'm starving, I'll take just a shot at a deer. If I'm not starving, I don't want to just shoot at an animal. I want to shoot an animal. And I'll concede that I don't like math, right? But I don't argue with its validity. Just because I don't like something doesn't mean I'll try and pretend it's not true. Now, let's say that I am a perfect shooter, which I am not. I miss all the time. I would submit if you don't miss, then you're not pushing yourself hard enough in training. But I miss. I'm not perfect. I'm not a perfect man. Only Jesus Christ our Savior was perfect. I am not perfect. Let's say that I was like a robotically shooting machine that never made a mistake. And let's say that I had a rifle that was not 1 MOA, not half MOA, 0.00001 MOA. For all intents and purposes, it shot exactly where you were aiming. If I see a deer and elk at 800 meters, that's pretty reasonable range for these long-range shooting things. Can I expect and be confident and sure is probably not the right word, because there's always this gray area in ballistics, right? That could be the time that your gun breaks. But aside from any kind of defect or anything, could you pull the trigger and shoot that animal rather than shoot at that animal? I would submit no. Why? Because of math. Time of flight. Look at what the time of flight is for, let's just pick one, a 308 at 800 meters. Right? Over a second? If you've ever been deer hunting or watched a deer, you'll know just through, unless that deer is just knocked out asleep, a deer can move quite a bit, certainly changing its vital kill zone from outside of where you were aiming in 1 second. That deer could be perfectly broadside standing there. You could execute a perfect shot. That gun could be right on your dope, your wind call, everything could have been dead on. And if that bullet was going exactly where you aimed, there's no guarantee you're going to hit that deer, because that deer might be a completely different spot than he was. And I'm not even talking about a running deer, just a step in the normal course of feeding, or when he hears a tree branch breaking near him and there's a squirrel or something that distracts him and he moves. You can't, in my opinion, I don't like to shoot at deer. I like to shoot deer or elk or whatever it is, excluding like varmints, like prairie dogs or stuff like that. I'll shoot at them. Shooting something I want to eat, something, large megafauna, something like that, I want to shoot that animal. I don't want to just shoot at an animal. I don't like that. You decide your ethics for yourself. But that's a living, breathing beast of the field that I want to be a good user of that resource. I don't want to just shoot at an animal like that. And you could argue that you want to do long-range hunting, and I'm not telling you it should be banned. I'm not telling you it should be illegal or anything like that. I'm just telling you, look at the math there. Just that one small thing alone, let alone the fact, going back to competition shooting. In competition shooting, even with your go-to rifle that you practice with all the time and who knows how many hours you spend behind it, in a competition, you have what are commonly referred to as fouling shots or snap-in shots or preparation shots, whatever you want to call it. Before you start the match, you get a couple of shots. And very often, if you're talking about ringing out the best precision, those shots are not acceptable. To make an adjustment to your dope, to your sling, to this, to that. You don't get that in real life. That's a competition thing. And again, I'm not telling you not to be dedicated to in a committed long-term relationship with long-range shooting. I'm just saying, step back if you're kind of living in this fantasy and thinking that it's practical. If you want to do it for the sport, for the precision of it, I get it. I've been down that rabbit hole. Just, I hope that it's not turning into a black hole for you and sucking you in and you wanting something to be a reality that's not a reality. Is it a beautiful discipline? Is it an art and a science? Yes, it is. Is it practical? I would submit there are far more practical things. Again, we have a finite amount that we can train, whether it's rifle, pistol, shotgun, that have more real world application, that are more likely. If you taught yourself as a practical gunfighter, right? This is gunfighter life. There's other podcasts on long range shooting. There's probably one called Long Range Shooting. And if you are in that and you want to listen to that, go ahead. But this is gunfighter life. If you're talking about real world practical gunfighting, let's say that you have an hour a day, and I'm just making up a number, you can spend practicing gunfighting, training, dry firing. How are you spending that resource? Are you spending it what makes sense in the real world and reality? Or is it a fantasy thing or just a sport thing? And there's nothing wrong with that. But judge soberly what it actually is. If you're talking about hunting, look at actual ranges, not what marketing is telling you, not them saying that, oh, the 308 is out of date, you got to have a 6.5 Creedmoor, and now the 6.5 Creedmoor is out of date, you got to have a 6.5 PRC, and now that's out of date, you got to have the 6.8 Western. But no, that was so last year. Now if you want to be, a hunter, you got to have the 7mm PRC. And next year maybe it'll be the 8mm LMNOP. Right? That's marketing. That's trying to get you and separate you from your money. And if you have disposable income, you spend it how you want. But look at it soberly for what's practical, whether from a gunfighting perspective, a hunting perspective, whatever it is. And if you decide, that's fine. I just judge soberly. If you're like, Long-range shooting is my golf. And that's how I want to spend my disposable income and time. I find it relaxing. I find it very good way to draw me out of the drudgery of everyday life and focus on something that I really enjoy doing. I'd say that's fantastic. And I'm not here to knock that. I'm here to kind of argue the practicality of it. Not telling you shouldn't do it. There should certainly, I don't believe, be any legislation against it. It shouldn't be any kind of hunting regulations against it, anything like that. I'm just saying, be circumspect and consider reality versus fantasy. With that, if you're still here, I'm not telling you have to agree with me. You don't have to agree with me. I know this podcast episode might be controversial. I'm not here to tell you what you want to hear. I'm here, hopefully, to speak the truth, popular or unpopular. Anyway, with that, hopefully we can still be friends. Tactical tip of the day. There are other positions to rifle shooting than prone or off a bench or off a rest. I hope that you will acquaint yourself with standing, kneeling, sitting positions as well. Something that can greatly aid you in that, and was my first competition rifle sling, is commonly referred to in gun speak, I almost said 1911 just because I'm used to saying that. The 1907 sling. As the name might suggest, it's been around and been used to good effect for a long time. If you're looking for a good practical rifle sling, you may give a look to the 1907 sling. Learn about proper sling tension, learn about bone-to-bone contact, meat-to-bone contact, meat-to-meat contact. You'll kind of understand what that means if you do a bit of standing, kneeling, sitting, shooting. Anyway, the tactical verse of the day. You shall do no injustice in judgment and measurements of length, weight, or volume. Men, I encourage you to judge soberly. And look at things honestly, clearly, and circumspectly. And if you don't agree with me, that's totally fine. But we're all called to look at things and do no injustice in judgment and measurements of length, weight, or volume. With that, thanks for listening, and have a blessed day.